We moved to the farm when I was 11. My father claimed it was for a simpler life. But even back then I could sense it had more to do with money than philosophy. The farmhouse was old, decades older than anything I'd lived in before, and I swear to God, the boards seemed to sigh when you stepped on them, like the house had been holding its breath for too long. My room overlooked the fields, which stretched out behind the house in rows of amber stalks. The first night, as I lay in bed, I thought I could hear them whispering. Just the wind, I told myself. Country air. It took some getting used to. But the second night, it wasn't the wind. It was a creaking sound, subtle, but not natural. Not with settling or mice in the attic. It was rhythmic. Measured. A dragging, groaning creak that seemed to rise out of the fields themselves, like a hidden door opening beneath the soil. I got up and pressed my face to the window. Moonlight painted everything in grayscale, and the corn swayed gently like waves. But there was something off in the distance, a shape that wasn't there during the day. It stood tall and narrow, like a man, but crooked, as if he were leaning on something. I blinked, and it was gone. The next morning, I didn't tell my parents. What could I say? The corn is making noises. Instead, I tried to shrug it off, but I avoided looking out the window after dark. Still, the creaking continued. Every night, just after midnight, always for the same amount of time, 12 minutes exactly. I know because I started timing it. It would begin at 12:06 a.m. and stop at 12:18. Not a second longer. The rhythm became maddening, like a pendulum in my skull. It grew louder over time. And then the dreams began. In the first one, I was standing in the middle of the field, barefoot, my toes sinking into the cold soil. The stalks were tall, much taller than I remembered, and they closed in around me. I couldn't move. Somewhere far off, I could hear that same creaking, and then, footsteps. Not fast, not frantic. Just deliberate. Heavy. I woke up before I saw him, but the imprint of the dream stayed with me all day. One afternoon, I worked up the nerve to go into the field. My dad warned me not to wander far. Don't want to get turned around out there, he'd said. But I needed to prove something to myself. I needed to know there was nothing there. I found it after maybe 20 minutes of walking. A bare patch of earth in the middle of the corn, where nothing grew. Perfectly circular. And in the center, embedded deep into the ground, was a single wooden post. Weather-worn and splintered. Tied around it was a length of frayed rope, loose and swaying slightly. There were deep grooves in the soil, as if something heavy had been dragged in a circle over and over again. I ran home and said nothing. That night, the creaking didn't start at 12:06. It started at 12:04. And it was closer. After that night, I stopped sleeping. I'd lie in bed, rigid under the blankets, watching the red digits of my alarm clock tick toward 12:04. And when they did, like clockwork, the creaking would begin again. But it wasn't distant anymore. It was right outside the house. I counted 12 distinct groans of the boards, slow, measured, each one growing heavier, closer. They sounded like the joints of a heavy gate swinging open, but with a dragging undertone. It was as if something burdened by weight was being pulled step by step across the ground. The sound always stopped just short of the porch. I told my parents the next day. I expected mockery, or at least mild concern, but what I got was silence. My dad exchanged a quick look with my mom. She muttered something about the boy adjusting to country air, and they sent me back upstairs like nothing happened. That day, I went back to the field. I didn't even think about it, I just needed to see that post again, confirm it hadn't changed. But when I got there, the rope was gone. The grooves in the soil were deeper. I backed out of the field and didn't return. That night, I stayed awake again. The creaking began at 12:02. 12 steps to the porch. Then silence. No scratching, no knocking. Just a presence I could feel. And in the morning, I found something on the windowsill of my room, a single corn husk, folded neatly into the shape of a man. I'd brought it to my parents, but they acted like I'd made it myself. I screamed at them, begged them to believe me. That's when my dad grabbed my shoulders and said something I still hear when I close my eyes. Just don't follow the sound. That's all you need to do. That was the last real conversation we had. The next night I tried earplugs. It didn't matter. The sound came through anyway, louder, clearer. I could hear each groan like it was inside the house. My body froze. I felt the air shift, as if a door had opened somewhere behind me. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Something was in the hallway. The next morning, all the doors in the house were ajar. Every single one. Including the cellar door, which we never used. My parents wouldn't talk about it. Wouldn't even acknowledge it. It was like they'd made some unspoken agreement to pretend everything was fine. On the 7th night, I made a mistake. I looked out the window. He was standing in the middle of the field, tall, thin, stooped, but I couldn't make out his face. Just the suggestion of it. Like it was smeared or folded in on itself. The rope was dragging behind him. I couldn't tell if it was attached to something. Or someone. And the creaking hadn't stopped. It was still approaching. Which meant, he wasn't the only one out there. I closed the blinds. That night, I slept in my closet, lights on, door cracked. And somehow, I must have dozed off. Because I woke to a whisper, inches from my ear. 12 steps left. I left the next day. I told my parents I was going to a friend's. They didn't stop me. Didn't say a word. I don't think they were expecting me to come back. I never did. But sometimes, even in the city, I wake at exactly 12:04. And I swear I can hear it, far off in the distance. Creaking. Getting closer. My cousin Levi inherited the farm when Uncle George died. It had been abandoned for years by that point, just a decaying hunk of wood and rust on the edge of a forgotten township. No one had set foot there since George's funeral, until Levi decided to turn it into a kind of weekend project. Something about reclaiming family history. He asked if I'd help clean it out. I said yes, mostly because I hadn't seen Levi in a while, and partly because I remembered that place all too well from our childhood visits. There was something unfinished there. Something I never really wanted to revisit, but always thought about. The drive was 3 hours into nowhere. Wheat and silence. When I got there, Levi was already at work, hauling out old tools, sweeping rat shit from the porch. He grinned when he saw me, but there was something behind his eyes, like he hadn't slept in days. "The barn's the worst," he said, not even saying hello. "But it's the smell in the pig house that's been driving me nuts." I stopped. "Pig house?" He nodded towards a small structure on the far side of the barn. A cinder block rectangle with a sagging tin roof. I didn't remember it from when we were kids. "It was added later," he said, already walking. "George kept his pigs there. But they say he stopped feeding them after Grandma died." The door creaked open and a wave of rot hit me like a slap. Not fresh decay, old, soaked in death. Levi shrugged like he'd gotten used to it. The inside was worse, a rusted trough, splintered fencing, and in the far corner, a hatch in the floor with a chain wrapped around the handle. A padlock hung open at the base of the chain. "Thought you said the pigs were gone," I muttered. "They are. But George used to talk about something under the pig house. Claimed he built a crawl space to keep the feed dry. But you know how he was." I did. George was a hard man. Cold, cruel even. I never forgot the time he let Levi's dog go missing and told him, deadpan, "Some things don't want to be kept." I looked at the hatch. "You ever open it?" Levi shook his head. "Haven't even touched it. But the smell's worse here than anywhere else." That night, we stayed in the farmhouse. Levi had set up cots in the living room since the upstairs was still a mess. I couldn't sleep. The house made noises, long, slow creaks and deep thuds that didn't sound like settling wood. I thought I heard something tapping on the window once, but when I looked, there was nothing. Around 2 a.m., Levi sat up on his cot. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. I nodded. It sounded like shuffling. From outside. I crept to the window again, this time more carefully, and peeked through the edge of the curtain. Across the yard, near the pig house, something moved. It was dragging. I couldn't see it clearly, but it looked like a man hunched over, crawling. Not like someone injured. Like someone used to moving that way. There was a limp, slapping sound as it moved, like wet cloth against concrete. We didn't sleep after that. In the morning, the hatch in the pig house was wide open. Levi swore he hadn't touched it. But the chain was neatly coiled beside it. Levi wanted to seal the hatch immediately, but I stopped him. "I think we should see what's down there," I said. "We need to know what we're dealing with." He didn't argue, but the look he gave me was all fear and fatigue. We waited until late afternoon. Neither of us wanted to be in that place at night again. The crawl space was barely 4 feet deep. We used Levi's work light, lowered it by its cord into the dark. At first, we saw only earth, matted with blackened straw and what looked like dried blood. But in the far back corner, barely visible, was a mound of something. Bones, maybe? Too many to be one animal. I dropped into the crawl. It smelled worse down there, like something had once rotted and seeped into the dirt itself. The bones weren't pig. They were smaller. Multiple sets. Some had buttons still clinging to them. Baby teeth scattered nearby. I turned and vomited into the corner. Then I heard the hatch slam shut. Above me, Levi screamed. I scrambled, clawing my way up, but the hatch wouldn't budge. I could hear him panicking on the other side. Then he went silent. A moment later, something else started moving in the crawl space. Not behind me, beneath me. The ground shifted, almost like it breathed. The soil gave slightly under my feet. I backed into the corner, eyes darting, heart pounding. The light flickered once, then died. Total black. I froze. Something was brushing against my leg. Not a root. Not a rat. Fingers. Small, dry fingers that dragged slowly across my calf. I screamed until my voice cracked. Pounded the underside of the hatch until my knuckles split. Then it opened, and Levi was hauling me out, pale, eyes wide. We didn't speak. We boarded it up, nailed the chain down, sealed the door with 2 rusted padlocks and a slab of wood. Then we left. I never went back. Levi stayed one more night to gather the rest of his things, but he never called me afterward. A few months later, I saw his name in the paper. He'd gone missing. His truck was found parked beside the pig house, engine cold, keys still in the ignition. The hatch was open again. There were no tracks, no signs of a struggle. Nothing stolen. Just an empty house and a chain uncoiled like a dead snake beside a yawning black hole. They sealed the property off after that. Called it a safety hazard. But sometimes I dream about it. The sound of something crawling under dirt. The slap of flesh on wood. A baby's tooth in my hand. And I always wake up with the same thought. That crawl space was never for feed. It was a mouth. And we fed it. I rented a cabin on the edge of an abandoned apple orchard last October. I needed space, mental and physical. Somewhere far from city noise, job stress, people. A retreat, the listing called it. Perfect for writers. Quiet, contemplative atmosphere. No distractions. No distractions. That part turned out to be painfully true. The cabin was cheaper than I'd expected, suspiciously cheap for a 2-week rental, but I wasn't in a place to be picky. It sat on a slight hill overlooking a sea of trees, thousands of them, mostly dead. Black trunks, skeletal limbs, roots like knotted fingers bursting from the ground. It had been decades since anyone harvested anything there. I couldn't even tell what kind of apple orchard it had been. Nothing remained but twisted bark and gray branches. When I arrived, the air smelled stale. Not of rot, just old air, undisturbed for a long time. The cabin was small but cozy. Rustic. No TV. No Wi-Fi. No reception. There was an old record player, and a single vinyl left beside it. The label read, in faint pencil, "Wind Sounds." I never played it. I tried to write. I really did. But something about the orchard pulled at me. It was too quiet. Too still. No birdsong, no insects, no rustling leaves. The silence felt staged, like the world was holding its breath. Every day, I walked to the porch with my morning coffee and stared out at the trees. They always looked the same. Motionless. Watching. On the fourth morning, I took a picture from the porch with my phone. Just for reference, I told myself. The photo caught the first 3 rows of trees, perfectly aligned, each row about 6 or 7 feet apart. Later that night, while organizing my notes, I pulled up the picture again. Something was off. The trees in the photo were further away than they looked now. It wasn't drastic, but the first row, which had clearly started at the edge of the grass, now seemed to be right up against the porch. I went outside to compare in person. The grass bore it out. The earth was disturbed, as though something had been dragged through it. Maybe I misremembered, I told myself. Maybe the slope of the hill distorted distance. Maybe the trees weren't moving. That night I dreamed of apples. Hundreds of them. Their skin bruised and soft, their centers teeming with fat, pulsing worms. I couldn't stop biting into them. Couldn't stop chewing. Couldn't spit them out. I woke gagging, bile in my throat, the taste of rot clinging to my tongue. In the kitchen, I found a real apple on the counter. I hadn't brought any with me. It was round, smooth, unnaturally perfect. Cold to the touch. I didn't eat it. The next night I heard tapping. Not on the door, not on the windows, on the walls. Like long branches brushing across wood. Not blown by wind, though. The air outside was still, dead. I turned off all the lights and sat in the dark, holding the fireplace poker. At 3:13 a.m., the tapping stopped. The next morning, I found footprints on the porch. Not mine. They were too wide, too long, and there were grooves alongside them, like something was being dragged. The apple from the kitchen was gone. In its place, on the table where I wrote, was a small wooden carving of a tree. Crude but detailed. It had no leaves. Just branches ending in what looked like human fingers. That night I didn't sleep. I waited. And when the tapping started again, it was coming from inside the walls. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the corner of the cabin with the fire poker clutched so tight my fingers went numb. The tapping inside the walls wasn't frantic or aggressive, it was slow. Calculated. As though something was gently feeling along the beams, searching for weakness. It would start near the kitchen, move along the south wall, pause near the fireplace. Then again, this time beneath the floorboards. By morning, the tapping had stopped. I didn't leave the house. Couldn't. I ate dry cereal straight from the box and watched the orchard. The nearest row of trees had crossed onto the porch. I'm not exaggerating. The trunks now loomed inches from the window, bark pressed flat against the glass like it was trying to see in. I checked my phone. No signal. I opened the door to run, to go anywhere else, but stopped. There were fresh apples everywhere. Lined along the porch railing, placed on the steps, balanced on the banister. Dozens. All perfect. All red. All watching. I slammed the door. That night, I tried to barricade myself in. I pushed the kitchen table against the front door, dragged the mattress into the bathroom and locked the door. Still, I heard the dragging outside. Not footsteps. Roots. Somewhere around 2 a.m., I felt a weight shift the air in the cabin. No sound. Just pressure. Like something massive had entered. I held my breath. Something brushed against the bathroom door, soft, brittle. A whisper of bark. Then silence. When dawn broke, I cautiously emerged. The mattress had gouges across it, long, parallel scores like something had raked claws across the fabric. The table was moved aside. Every apple was gone. But a new one sat on my writing desk, this one carved. A human face. Crude like a child had done it. Mouth open, teeth shaped by knife wounds. Eyes wide. I packed what I could and ran. I didn't bother locking the door behind me. I ran down the dirt road until I hit gravel, then pavement, then a gas station 15 miles away. I looked back only once. The orchard had spread. The trees now lined both sides of the road, their branches reaching out as if to grab passing cars. The clerk at the gas station looked at me like I was deranged. My face was pale, scratched, eyes hollow. I tried to explain, but the words felt insane coming out of my mouth. I drove back to the city that day. I didn't sleep. I didn't stop. Weeks passed. Then the apple arrived. No note. Just a small, perfect fruit placed on my kitchen counter. I don't know how it got into my apartment. I live on the 5th floor. No fire escape. I threw it away. Burned it. The next day, there were 2 more. One in the fridge. One on my pillow. The carving was back, too. The same crude face. The same hollow eyes. I don't go outside much anymore. I hear wood creaking at night. Not the building, something else. Something alive. Something patient. I don't think I ever left the orchard. I think it came with me. And it's still growing. I was 13 the summer we moved to Eddington Hollow. My mom called it a fresh start, but I knew it was about her divorce. The house was old, barely holding itself together, with wallpaper that peeled like sunburned skin and pipes that groaned when you flushed anything. But the land was beautiful, rolling hills, towering pines, and behind it all, the creek. Eddington Creek ran behind our property, wide and slow, cutting through thick woods before vanishing into fog. The locals had nicknamed it the Mirror, because of how still the surface stayed. Even in wind, even during storms. It never rippled. Never moved. I hated it. The first time I went down there, something was already watching. I didn't see it, not directly, but the feeling was immediate and visceral. A prickle on the back of the neck. Breath going shallow. Like I just walked into a room someone else had been sitting in for hours. I chalked it up to nerves, new town, new school, new ghosts in the closet. But then I found the stone piles. At the edge of the creek were dozens of stacked stones. Not natural, not scattered. Balanced. Meticulously placed. Some were only 2 or 3 high, others stacked chest level, each topped with a flat rock that pointed toward the water. I knocked one over. The next morning, it was rebuilt. Only higher. Sharper. By the end of that week, new piles had appeared around the house. On the porch. On the windowsills. In front of the door. I asked my mom about them. She said I probably hadn't noticed them before. But they're new, Mom, I insisted. She shrugged. Maybe someone's playing a game. You said you wanted to make friends, didn't you? That night I dreamt of water. Thick black water. I was standing waist deep in it, unmoving, staring into the creek while something stirred just beneath the surface. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it, rubbing against my legs, circling, always brushing but never touching fully. When I woke, my feet were wet. Not damp. Wet. Mud streaked the sheets. I ran to the back door, unlocked. My mom insisted I'd gone outside in my sleep. You used to sleepwalk as a kid, she told me. Nothing to be scared of. That night I locked the door. Deadbolt, chain, everything. Still woke up soaked. On the 4th morning, I found something new on the front porch. It wasn't a stone pile. It was a dead bird. Perfectly centered on the welcome mat, neck snapped backward, beak filled with mud. I didn't go near the creek again. But it didn't matter. The creek was coming closer. After the dead bird, things accelerated. The stacked stones got stranger, more intricate, less like piles and more like totems. Some had feathers wedged between the rocks, others bones. They appeared every morning without fail, always closer to the house. One showed up on the windowsill above my bed. The rock on top had a scratch in it that looked like a mouth, grinning. I begged my mom to leave. She laughed at me. You're just having nightmares again. Stress from the move. But she never explained how the footprints got there. That Saturday, I found prints in the mud circling the house, bare feet. Wide, heavy. No tread, no socks, just long, toe-heavy impressions that tracked from the back door to the creek and back again. Some pressed into the grass near the porch were still wet. That night, I tried to stay awake. I sat in bed with the flashlight, clutching a kitchen knife under the covers. But sometime after 3 a.m., I must have drifted off. I woke to the creak of floorboards. Slow, deliberate. I didn't move. My eyes adjusted. There was something standing in my room. It was tall. Too tall. Its head nearly scraped the ceiling, and its limbs were too long for the torso. I couldn't see its face, just the silhouette, arms hanging past its knees, fingers twitching. The smell of wet leaves filled the air. It didn't make a sound. Didn't come closer. It just watched. I must have passed out. When I woke, the knife was gone. In its place was a stone, flat, smooth, black, and still damp. I didn't tell my mom. I stopped speaking altogether for a while. The only time I felt remotely safe was at school. One of the teachers noticed I was falling asleep in class, shaking during tests, flinching when someone touched me. She called my mom. I overheard the conversation, how I needed structure, how kids act out during transitions. I wanted to scream. Then, one night, the creek overflowed. Not from rain. Not from any storm. It just swelled, silently, like something underneath had grown tired of waiting. I woke to the sound of the back steps cracking. Water had reached the porch. Stones floated up with the current, then sank again like teeth disappearing into gums. We evacuated the next day. The local fire marshal said there'd been a rupture underground. A sinkhole forming beneath the old water table. Rare, he said. Unpredictable. But not unheard of. They relocated us to a rental 30 miles away. I shared a room with my mom. Slept under a pile of blankets, eyes on the door every night. Weeks passed. The stones stopped. Then, one morning, while brushing my teeth, I saw it again. Behind me. In the mirror. Standing in the corner of the bathroom. Still. Watching. And smiling. After the dead bird, things escalated. The stacked stones began appearing not just outside, but inside the house. On the windowsill in the bathroom, balanced on the corner of the kitchen sink, once even directly on my pillow. Each was more intricate than the last, balanced impossibly, decorated with bits of hair, twigs tied into knots, strips of cloth that looked suspiciously like the ones from my missing socks. I tried ignoring it. Tried pretending I was dreaming it all. But dreams didn't follow you into the kitchen at 3 a.m. They didn't rattle the doorknob while you sat on the toilet, holding your breath, too afraid to flush. I begged my mom to leave. I cried. Screamed. She snapped at me finally, said I was acting like a damn baby, and that maybe my father had been right about how soft I was. That night, I locked my bedroom door and pushed my desk against it. I left the light on. I shoved earplugs in and played rain sounds on repeat from an old cassette I found in a box under the stairs. The sounds helped, but not enough. Because I still woke up. And when I did, I wasn't in my room. I was on the porch. Barefoot, in pajamas. Mud caked my hands. My mouth tasted like dirt. I must have sleepwalked. That's what I told myself, over and over, as I tried to scrub the grit from under my fingernails. But it didn't explain the fact that my bedroom door was still locked from the inside. Or the fact that the desk hadn't moved. Or that the porch door had been bolted shut, yet now stood open behind me. Worse still, my footprints weren't the only ones. There were others in the mud, wider and longer, with strange grooves behind them. As if something had slithered. Or dragged itself. And they led back to the creek. That was the first time I stopped pretending. The next day, I skipped school. I waited until Mom left for work and walked back to the creek, following the tracks. I wanted to prove to myself it was just a raccoon. Maybe a bear. Something real. But the moment I reached the bank, my legs locked. The water was gone. Not dried up, gone. The creek bed was hollowed, smooth, and clean. Like it had been scraped. Deep claw marks raked the mud along the bottom. And at the center, where the water had been deepest, a tunnel opened downward, black, wide, pulsing gently like a throat. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough for something to shift inside the tunnel. I didn't see it. Not directly. But I heard the breathing. Wet. Shuddering. And I ran. That night, the house groaned louder than usual. Not the pipes, the beams. As if the walls themselves were flexing, bulging outward. My mom slept through it. I didn't. Around midnight, my door creaked open. I knew I'd locked it. I knew. But the knob turned without resistance, and the air grew cold. I didn't move. I just stared at the dark corner beside my closet where the moonlight didn't reach. And then it smiled at me. A wide, gaping grin filled with teeth like pebbles. The eyes were the worst, empty, but not blank. Alive. Watching. It whispered one word. Deeper. The next morning, my mom finally listened. I must have looked bad enough, shaking, fevered, my pillow soaked in sweat and something that smelled like algae. We packed that day and left by sunset. They say the property was condemned shortly after. Something about foundation collapse and unstable groundwater. No one was allowed near it. But a few nights ago, I woke with mud under my nails again. My feet were damp. There was a single stone balanced on my nightstand. And I swear I could still hear it. Breathing. Waiting. When I was a teenager, I lived in a small town in central Kentucky, the kind with no stoplights, 3 churches, and a general store that sold everything from buckshot to bubblegum. My parents bought a small house on the edge of an old tobacco field after my dad lost his job in the city. It was the kind of place where people waved as they passed but didn't talk much beyond that. The house came cheap because of the field. People said it was retired, the land had been fallow for years. The stalks were long dead, left upright and gray, giving the place a look like a petrified forest. But that wasn't the reason people avoided it. It was the bell. There was an old bell mounted on a wooden frame in the middle of the field. Tall, rusted, crooked as hell. The kind you'd expect in a schoolyard from 100 years ago. No rope hung from it anymore, and it hadn't been used since before I was born. But every evening, just after dusk, it rang. Once. Just one heavy, hollow toll. My mom thought it was a prank. Said someone must be sneaking out to hit it with a stick or a mallet. But it was too consistent. Every night, right at 7:34 p.m., give or take a few seconds. Even on Sundays. Even in the rain. Dad never said much about it. The first night we heard it, he frowned, looked out at the field, and mumbled. "Still going, huh?" When I asked what he meant, he just shook his head and said, "Nothing to worry about. Old stories." But he started drinking more after we moved in. Spent longer hours staring out the back window. One day, I asked a local kid at school about it. Tyler Morton. He didn't say anything at first, just kind of stared past me like he was calculating something. Then he asked me how close I'd gotten. "Close to what?" I asked. "The bell." I told him I'd never been out in the field. Not once. "Don't," he said, eyes dead serious. "No matter what you hear, don't answer it." That night, I dreamed of the field. I was walking through it in pitch black, the dead stalks brushing against my face like fingers. I could hear the bell ringing again and again, faster and faster. I wasn't walking toward it, I was being pulled. I woke up sweating. 7:33 p.m. The bell rang. But this time, I heard something new. Whispers. Faint, layered. Dozens of voices just outside my window, murmuring over each other like a recording played too slow. I crept to the glass. The field looked the same. The bell stood still. Then the light on the porch flickered. When it came back, I saw them. Figures in the field. Standing in a ring around the bell. Not moving. Just watching the house. I called for my dad. By the time he came to the window, they were gone. He didn't ask questions. Didn't comfort me. Just poured himself a drink and locked the back door. The next day, the general store owner slipped me a folded note with my change. It read, "Don't look out the window tomorrow," and someone had drawn a tiny bell beneath the words.